So I crossed the Atlantic in 1989 as a participant of the Ark, and I went to work for Jimmy Cornell in 1990. So on and off, been involved with the Ark ever since then.
Wow. So how does it feel to be the last one then for you?
Well, it is a very strange feeling. Obviously, I've been involved with the Ark for over 30 years, and I just feel the time is right to move on, to hand over to the next generation, to continue the great job that we have done at World Cruising Club in expanding our portfolio of events over the years, and to see it get even more established, and to hopefully see more events worldwide.
Going back to your first Atlantic crossing, what boat was it on, and what do you remember about that crossing?
Oh, it was. I sailed on a Freedom 39, and it was my father's boat, and it was his long-term ambition to sail across the Atlantic. And when I had decided to have a break in my working career and change direction, the opportunity arose for me to take some time off, and I basically had a gap year when I was 29, and I was involved with helping to prepare the boat because it was a new build, and I'd learnt so much. Obviously, I'd already done a lot of racing sailing and done a lot of already offshore sailing, but preparing for the Atlantic crossing was something very special. And for the crossing itself, the things that I remember most about it was, first of all, that it was one of the years that the Ark start was delayed by 24 hours because of bad weather, and so we had an extra day in Las Palmas, which meant instead of starting on a Saturday, we started on the Sunday, which gave us the opportunity to celebrate my father's birthday ashore rather than being at sea. And the change to the Sunday then stuck as a feature for the Ark. Having just seen that they got many more spectators on the Sunday, they decided to continue to start on a Sunday, which has since been the tradition. But for me, the actual crossing itself, it was a tremendous experience, and I loved the Atlantic swell and the sailing that we were doing. But unfortunately, it became memorable because we did have a small accident on board, where I was knocked unconscious in an accidental jibe of the fore boom, and so there was quite a lot of chatter on the SSB radio net between my father and other people in the fleet, doctors offering advice, and so it was experiencing the benefits of being at sea with other boats that we felt firsthand. Of course, as always happens, we were exactly halfway across, but there was no choice but to carry on. But it was that accident that gave me time to reflect on what I was going to do with my life, and decided that perhaps what I had planned wasn't going to be something, and I'd rather do something to embrace the day. And that's when I started to think about changing direction, and the accident gave me the opportunity, or the incident I should say, gave me the opportunity to then go and talk to Jimmy Cornell, who very kindly then offered me a job working on the next Ark, and that's where it all started. So it's been a tremendous journey, and I haven't regretted any of it, and I think we've been extremely fortunate in the way that we've developed our events, grown the portfolio, and established some really cracking events which are really world class and respected as being such. So I'm leaving World Cruising Club at a point where I'm really happy with what we've achieved over the years, and handing over to some people who are going to continue that, hopefully, that trajectory of growth, and to continue to put the participants first.
Jumping back to your accident, you're knocked unconscious. Do you remember the events before it? Did you suffer memory loss from that? Do you remember it even happening?
I've been suffering, and this is not for the record. I've never been the same since. No, in all seriousness, to answer your question, so what happened was that it was the middle of the day. It was a lovely, calm, apart from the Atlantic swell, reasonably calm day, not too windy. Because of the rig that we had, it was a cat rig schooner, and so we had a mast right up in the bow, and it wasn't traditional Freedom. It was conventional booms, not wishbones, and so the foreboom and the main were on different sides of the boat, and because the foreboom was so far forward, it was very difficult to prevent it effectively. So all the preventer did that we managed to rig up would slow it down. It didn't stop it completely. Unfortunately, the boat caught a wave, as is often the case in the Atlantic swell, but I had gone onto the foredeck to rig the sort of the staysail that we had, because it was that light. The winds were not, it wasn't that windy. I was on the foredeck preparing to hoist the staysail, and the boat caught a wave, and the foreboom jibed and came across and gave me a glancing blow to the head. I ducked, but not far enough or fast enough. The next thing that I remember was waking up down below. So I mean, I was unconscious for more than a few seconds, and the crew got me below. But the real reason it became a sort of eye-opener for me, or made me think about and reflect on life, was that I was not wearing a life jacket, and things could have turned out very differently. And so that's why I am so particular about safety and life jackets, especially, and it's so important whatever the weather. And I have a rule on my boat now that before the lines leave the dock or the anchor leaves the bottom, the crew are all in life jackets, and that's the way we stay when we sail.
Is that also a rule? I suppose you can't enforce that on an Atlantic crossing with crew, but I suppose you can enforce that they have those life jackets on board.
Oh, absolutely, and that's part of world sailing. Offshore special regulations is they have a suitable life jacket that's properly equipped with a light and a whistle and now a personal AIS and everything else. But you can't. You can enforce that they have them on board, but you can't enforce that they they wear them. But it is one of the reasons why we do encourage people. Well, no, it is a requirement to wear their life jackets as they leave the marina in Las Palmas, so that we can actually see. Well, we've already checked their life jackets, but it just reinforces the idea that actually wearing a life jacket when you go to sea is the right thing to do. Obviously, if skippers relax that, then that's their prerogative. But that's why, personally, I feel strongly about that particular point.
And safety must be one of the topics, I assume, which has developed a lot since your first arc, particularly with communications as well.
Massively changed. I mentioned that we were using the SSB, but we didn't have any other forms of long-range communication. So there was a higher percentage of the fleet that had SSB radios. Yes, you could make a link call via your SSB via the Coast Guard, but it wasn't particularly easy. It wasn't like picking up a sat phone and dialing a number. And so, email was not a thing. Long-range communications were neither. That's the main thing that has changed. But with that, the development of alerting devices. So I mentioned the personal AISs. EPIRBs were around, but they've become more sophisticated. So basically, I think those are the main things that have really changed. And electronic charting, much more prevalent now than it was. We had Decca on board, which I don't think was much good for the Atlantic crossing.
And did you use a sextant back then? Did you do lots of astronavigation in your first crossing? And
we did a little bit. I actually did my first noon sight with a sextant when I was 15 on the Fastnet, and I went on to get an O-level in navigation.
Oh wow!
And used a sextant quite a lot when I was in the Navy. for my I had to qualify for using the sextant. I had to do the passage from I'm going to say, I mean, it was from Hong Kong, but it was down to Manila. I had to do that passage on sextant alone. I wasn't allowed to use anything else in a small warship.
And so the Navy was at the career then, which you had your gap year from, which you then left to focus on world cruising.
Yeah, I had decided to leave the Navy, so I left the Navy, and I had some ideas about what I might do, but nothing concrete. I had done my GMAT exam to go and do a business course. I had looked at universities to go and do a second degree, but then I got involved with world cruising and it all changed. When Jeremy and I took over the ownership of the company in 2006, we only had the Ark Europe and Ark Portugal, and so we were quite a small team that was doing it. But our first step was to launch the idea of a round the world rally, and so there was a lot of travel involved in just setting up the first round the world rally, and then being involved with a lot of the stopovers. But I have to admit, I haven't actually been to all of them, but because as we started to deliver the World Ark, then everything started to get busier, and it was in the sort of after 2010 when things really started to take off for us, and we decided to first of all, it was about the same time actually, launch Ark Plus, because the Ark was continually full and we needed to find a way of looking after more boats to go across the Atlantic. And so we launched Ark Plus with the idea of going to the Cape Verde Islands to differentiate it from the Ark itself. And we also decided to go annual with the World Ark. And then we had we did the Ark Baltic as well. So suddenly we started to add lots of things, and so there was no way that I could go to all of the places. But I have been to a great number of the. In fact, I can say I've been to all the places on the World Ark route in the first half, but not all of them on the second half. Some of them, but not all of them.
Which are your standout destinations, places that you might go back on your own boat?
I really like Vanuatu. So I think that's a very special place.
What was it
Whether
about?
It still is, I don't know, but it was just because it was so remote, such a different culture. It was just amazingly different.
And is the plan to go sailing now, to come back and do the Ark in your own boat?
I don't have any plans for the moment. I have commitments at home which are going to take up my time for the time being, and I'll see how my plans develop. But I don't have any burning ambition to go sailing immediately.
Yeah, and I had just one last question, which we touched on before. We talked about safety being a major change. What else has changed a lot? I know, for example, boat size and more catamarans.
Definitely been a trend for boat size to increase. Production boats have got, over the years, I'm not talking about recently, but over the years, production boats have got cheaper relatively, and so big manufacturers coming in and reducing prices of new boats, so many more people going into the boating market, which has meant that we've lost a lot of the smaller boats that we would have seen on the Ark in earlier years. Now it's quite unusual to see a boat under 35 feet, for example, whereas when I first started, there were quite a lot of boats that were that size. So the size of boat has definitely grown, and then recently the trend for over the last 5 years is an increase in the number of catamarans, and they are just getting bigger as well. So not only the number of them is getting greater, the size of them is getting bigger. So that's something that has changed a lot.
And what about the cruise? I don't know if this just feels like me noting it, but is it more accessible for the younger crews these days? Are there more finance options or ways for them to take sabbaticals and buy boats or hire boats to?
I don't think that there's more options. I think there's a change in people's emphasis on life. You know, maybe people are putting their experiences before their careers, and actually taking the plunge and saying, actually, we want to do this and we want to do it with our children, for example, rather than saying, oh, we can't possibly do it, we've got children, we need to wait. I think it's just a shift in mentality. I don't think it's necessarily a shift in. I don't think it's because there are financing plans available.
Yeah, it's just.
I think some countries are. And I can't tell you the specific countries, but some Nordic countries are much more aligned with giving people sabbaticals.
Yeah.
And so you don't have to work for a company for very long before you can say that you want to have a sabbatical.
So am I right then in thinking that there are more families and younger people doing the ARC today than there were 10 years ago or 20 years ago even?
Possibly this year in particular, yes. We've always had a lot of children. We've always had a lot of families. I think there's more because we've got more boats. But you know, I was surprised that we had more children on the ARC Plus than we did on the ARC this year. So percentage-wise, it's a much higher percentage. But then ARC Plus is more of a. Some people like to describe it as the traditional, even though it's on a different route. It's more of the traditional ARC. It's how the ARC used to be, because it's more families and owner drivers